The room burst into laughter the moment the attorney placed the thin envelope in my hands. My brothers slapped each other's backs, champagne glasses raised, their voices booming as they celebrated the $25 million they had just inherited. All I had was paper that felt almost weightless, and in that instant, it felt like the whole world was laughing at me. If you've ever seen the ground vanish beneath your feet, you'll understand. That sharp drop in your chest. The heat rising in your ears. I knew humiliation well, but never like this. Before I even opened it, Harold Jr. leaned across the table and sneered, "Guess Dad knew you weren't fit for real money." And everyone roared again. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe right now, because this could happen in any family. My hands trembled as I slid the paper open. Inside, there were no checks, no bonds, not even a note. Just 2 stiff train tickets, pressed flat, their ink faded slightly with age. The silence from the attorney said everything. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. My brothers leaned in, eyes shining with the cruelest delight. 2 train tickets? My youngest brother scoffed, his watch glinting like a dagger under the light. Maybe Dad wanted you to finally see the world you'll never belong to. His words cut deeper than he knew. Everyone laughed harder, and in that laughter, I felt myself shrink smaller than I'd ever been. The sound of their mocking echoed in my head, louder than the clinking glasses. I clutched the envelope tighter, the paper edges biting into my skin. The attorney remained stone-faced, flipping through his papers like nothing was wrong. That silence was worse than the insults. It was as if he already knew what this meant. I stared at those tickets, their edges stiff, their smell faintly musty, like something locked away for years. They didn't belong here, among the golden pens and leather-bound contracts. They looked cheap, almost pathetic, but my father had chosen them for me, and that single fact gnawed at me, twisting confusion into shame. Harold Jr. raised his glass again. To the servant son, always taking care of Dad. And look what he got for it. A trip to nowhere. Their laughter doubled. My cheeks burned red, but I didn't dare respond. I'd spent years holding my tongue while caring for our father. And even now, I couldn't speak. I wanted to throw those tickets back at them, to rip them in half and scream. But I didn't. I sat there, humiliated, every second etching deeper into my memory. I wondered if this was the final joke, if my father's last act toward me was this cruel. The attorney finally looked up. His voice was low, calm, almost hesitant. The will has been read. The division is final. No one seemed to notice the faint pause in his words. I did. A hesitation, as though there was something more unsaid. But when I tried to meet his eyes, he quickly looked away. My youngest brother leaned closer, smirking. Don't look so surprised, Harold. You always were the housekeeper, not the heir. Be grateful you even got that. He flicked the edge of my envelope with his finger, as if testing how fragile I was. I said nothing. My silence was the only armor I had left. The room was bright with chandeliers, but to me it felt suffocating, as though shadows stretched from every corner. I heard the hiss of champagne fizzing, the tap of shoes across marble, the buzz of self-satisfied laughter. It was all noise. All I could see were the 2 slips of paper in my hands. The tickets were old, yes, but not worthless. They were printed for a destination. My eyes skimmed the faint letters, the name of a town I'd never heard of. Something about it stirred the air in my chest. For a moment, the laughter around me faded. I held them tighter, wondering if they meant more than what they seemed. Still, the humiliation was unbearable. My brothers clinked glasses over my head, like victors over a fallen enemy. I was the punchline, the forgotten son, the dutiful fool. That was the role they had cast me in. And in that moment, I almost believed it was true. I looked back at the attorney. He was packing his files, carefully avoiding my eyes. That silence again, that pause in his voice, it haunted me even more than the laughter. I knew there was something hidden, something he wasn't saying. My brothers didn't notice. They were too busy basking in their millions, already planning what to buy. Their words were shallow, greedy, dripping with arrogance. Yachts, cars, penthouses, and yet, the more they spoke, the more I clutched the envelope against my chest. The tickets felt heavier now, though I knew they weighed almost nothing. It was like they carried a secret, something only I was meant to uncover. My father had placed them in my hands for a reason. Whether it was a curse or a gift, I couldn't yet tell. I remembered the way my father looked at me in his final days, the quiet nods, the whispered words that I never fully understood. A small voice inside me told me this envelope was not an insult. It was something else, something bigger. And yet, surrounded by that room of sneering faces, I couldn't believe it. All I felt was shame. Shame for the years I gave, the sacrifices I made, the life I put aside. And for what? 2 train tickets and a room full of laughter. I almost crushed the envelope in my fist, the paper crinkling under my grip, but I stopped. If my father left me this, it mattered. I had to believe that. Even through the humiliation, even through the sting of being mocked, I couldn't throw it away. My brothers noticed my hesitation. "Look at him," one said, smirking. "He thinks there's a secret treasure hidden in that envelope. Poor Harold, always chasing scraps." Their words sank deep, but they also lit something in me. Because maybe they were right. Maybe I was chasing scraps. But maybe those scraps were worth more than any millions they could squander in a year. And if my father trusted me with this, then I owed it to him to see it through. The room spun with noise, but my focus never left the tickets. My father's handwriting on the envelope, faint but steady, stared back at me like an unspoken message. It wasn't money, but it was something. Something only I had. I slipped the envelope into my jacket, close to my chest. My brothers laughed harder, mistaking it for shame. Let them laugh. Let them toast. Something told me this story wasn't finished. As I rose to leave, their laughter echoed behind me. My face burned, but my hands were steady now. I didn't know what the tickets meant. I didn't know what lay ahead. But I knew this wasn't the end. And that was all I got. Or so they thought. I couldn't sleep that night. The laughter from the will reading kept replaying in my head, sharp as broken glass. My brothers with their grins, their champagne, their mocking words, and me, clutching 2 old train tickets like they were a curse. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if this was all my life was worth after everything I'd given. The truth is, I gave my father more years than anyone else. When he got sick, they disappeared. They had meetings, vacations, new romances, excuses that always sounded polished. I was the one who stayed. I learned to measure his pills, to lift his weak frame from the bed, to sit through his endless nights of coughing when no one else cared. I became his shadow. I stopped traveling. I stopped dating. My friends moved on, built families, bought houses. I stayed in my father's house, making soup he barely touched, changing sheets that smelled of medicine. I gave him my life because I thought one day it would mean something. That one day he'd see I had given up everything for him. But to my brothers, I was just the servant son. They would come in their expensive suits, cologne filling the air, and they'd pat me on the shoulder like I was staff. "You're doing a good job, Harold. Keep it up." They'd kiss Dad on the cheek, stay 10 minutes, then leave with their phones buzzing in their pockets. I would stand there, holding the tray of untouched tea, feeling invisible. I remember one afternoon when my youngest brother walked in with his girlfriend. She looked around the house with disgust. "It smells like sickness here," she said, wrinkling her nose. He laughed and told her, "That's Harold's world. Don't worry, you'll never have to live like that." I stood in the doorway, my hands tight around the laundry basket. They didn't even notice me. Years of this chipped away at me. Every holiday, every birthday, it was the same story. I set the table. They brought the stories of their trips to Europe, their new cars, their deals. I'd sit quietly, smiling when expected, nodding when needed. My father would sometimes glance at me, his eyes tired, as if he knew. But he never said a word in front of them. Late at night, though, when the house was silent, he spoke differently. I'd be helping him back to bed, and he'd whisper things that clung to me. One night, he asked me softly, "Harold, what matters more, what you're given, or what you continue?" His voice was weak, fading, but his eyes were sharp. I didn't know how to answer. I just nodded, holding his hand as he drifted to sleep. At the time, I didn't understand. I thought it was one of those strange things sick men say when they're close to the end. But the way he looked at me, it was like he was trying to leave me something more than words. Something I wasn't ready to see. My brothers never heard that question. They never heard the long pauses, the heavy sighs, the whispered truths in the dark. They never sat through the silence of an old man who knew he was running out of time. They were too busy living their lives, while I gave mine away piece by piece. Sometimes I hated him for it. I hated that he let me carry the burden alone. I hated that he never forced them to help, never demanded their presence. He just let me do it all, as if he knew I would never refuse him. And I didn't. I never walked away, even when I wanted to. But there were moments too, tiny, fleeting moments, when I felt he saw me. He would squeeze my hand when I helped him sit up. He would whisper, "Thank you," in a voice no one else heard. And once, just once, I saw tears in his eyes when I sang him a hymn my mother used to love. Those moments kept me going. They were the crumbs of recognition I clung to. Still, it wasn't enough. My life was shrinking while theirs was expanding. I remember cleaning out the attic one summer, dust coating my arms, when I heard laughter outside. My brothers had arrived in matching sports cars. Their engines roared while I stood there with a box of old family photos, coughing from the dust. It felt like two worlds colliding. Theirs shiny and fast, mine buried in shadows. They mocked me constantly. "Careful, Harold," one of them joked once. "Don't get too attached to being a nurse. You're not getting paid for it." The others laughed, clinking glasses over my head like it was all a game. I smiled weakly, but inside I was breaking. I wanted to scream that I had given up everything, that they owed me something, but I never did. Even at Dad's bedside, they couldn't resist. When he was too weak to eat, one brother smirked and said, "Guess Harold's cooking is killing him faster than the cancer." I froze, holding the spoon halfway to Dad's lips. Dad looked away, and I swallowed my anger. That silence, his and mine, felt like betrayal. It wasn't just them, though. It was me, too. I let it happen. I let myself become invisible. I told myself that sacrifice was love, that someday it would be worth it. I told myself that when the will came, Dad would see me, truly see me, and give me something that showed my years hadn't been wasted. But instead, he gave me 2 train tickets, 2 slips of paper that the whole room laughed at, 2 pieces of cardboard that felt like a cruel joke after everything I had endured. And yet, I can't shake his question. What matters more, what you're given, or what you continue? That question has haunted me since the night he asked it. It followed me as I carried him to bed, as I wiped his brow, as I sat in the silence of the house after he was gone. It followed me into the lawyer's office, echoing in my ears while everyone else drowned me in laughter. What if the tickets weren't a punishment? What if they were an answer? I don't know yet, but something tells me that's what he left me. An answer hidden in a journey I haven't taken. And maybe that's why the attorney stayed so quiet. Maybe he knows more than he's saying. I thought about tearing the tickets apart that night, shredding them into worthless confetti. But I couldn't do it. My fingers wouldn't let me. Something in my chest tightened every time I tried, as if ripping them would be ripping away the last piece of my father's voice. So I put them back in the envelope. I placed it on the table beside my bed, and I stared at it in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. My brothers had their millions. They were probably already drunk on their victory. And me, I was left with a question and 2 tickets. The laughter still stung, but something else stirred beneath it. A flicker, a pull, as though those tickets weren't the end of the story, but the beginning of one. I didn't know where they would lead me, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. At the time, I never understood those words. The next morning, I returned to the lawyer's office, my envelope tucked under my arm. My brothers were already there, champagne bottles cracked open, their laughter spilling through the polished hall like it owned the place. They raised their glasses the moment I walked in, toasting not to our father, but to themselves. Here comes the pauper, Harold Jr., smirked, his diamond cufflinks catching the light. "Careful. Don't spend those tickets all in one place." The others chuckled, their voices sharp, echoing off the marble walls. I gripped the envelope tighter, the corners digging into my palm. Every laugh was a blade, and I felt every cut. I sat at the edge of the room, quiet, small. The lawyer shuffled his papers, his face unreadable. My brothers leaned against the desk, their laughter bouncing off each other like firecrackers. "Dad always knew," one of them said, raising his glass. "Harold could never handle real money. That's why he gave him toys instead." Their words seared into me. I wanted to yell. I wanted to stand, slam the table, and tell them about the nights I fed our father spoon by spoon, about the hours I watched over him while they were gone. But my voice stayed trapped inside me. A stone lodged in my throat. All I could do was clutch the envelope tighter, my knuckles white. The lawyer finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and it cut through the noise. "Gentlemen, the will has been executed as written. There is nothing further to discuss." His tone carried weight, but my brothers ignored it. They only cared about their millions, their victory. I felt invisible again. I glanced down at the tickets. The ink was faded, but the names were still legible. The paper smelled faintly of old leather, as if it had been tucked away for decades. My brothers noticed me staring. "Go on, Harold," one said, smirking. "Why don't you take your grand adventure? Maybe you'll find a nickel under a train seat." Their laughter roared again. My face burned. I thought about ripping the envelope apart right there in front of them, tearing the tickets into shreds so they would know their words didn't matter. My hands twitched, ready. But then I caught the lawyer's eyes. For the first time, he wasn't avoiding me. He was watching carefully, and there was something in his look, something unspoken. Before I could act, he cleared his throat. "Mr. Harold," he said softly, "please remember, one of those tickets must be used before the end of the month. Otherwise, you lose everything tied to it." The words landed heavy in the room. The laughter stopped, if only for a moment. Everything tied to it? My heart skipped. What did that mean? My brothers exchanged quick glances, their smugness faltering just slightly. But then they shook it off, laughing again, pretending it was nothing. "There's nothing tied to those tickets," one scoffed. "Just the dignity he lost when Dad handed them to him." The lawyer didn't respond. His lips pressed thin, his hands tightening on the papers. I wanted to ask him outright, to demand the truth, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched, and I realized the room was holding something I wasn't supposed to see yet, something buried. My brothers poured more drinks, the sound of liquid fizzing into crystal glasses. "Let's toast again," the youngest grinned, "to the fact that Harold's inheritance can fit in an envelope, while ours fills bank accounts." They raised their glasses high, their laughter spilling over me like acid. I stared at them, their faces glowing with arrogance. The gold on their wrists, the shine of their shoes, the smugness carved into every line of their smiles. For the first time, I didn't just feel shame. I felt anger rising, slow and sharp, filling my chest like fire. But the tickets pulled me back. The texture of the paper under my fingers grounded me. My father's handwriting on the envelope whispered louder than their insults. Something told me I couldn't tear them. Not yet. Not until I understood what everything tied to it meant. So I slipped the envelope back into my jacket. My brothers smirked at the gesture, mistaking it for weakness. "Protecting your prize, Harold?" one sneered. "Careful, or someone might steal your cardboard fortune." Their voices rang with cruelty. But for the first time, I wasn't listening to them fully. I was thinking about my father. I remembered his voice, fragile but firm, asking that question, what matters more, what you're given, or what you continue? At the time, I thought it was nonsense. But now, sitting in that room of laughter and greed, it began to echo differently. Maybe those tickets weren't worthless. Maybe they were the continuation. The lawyer's words haunted me. One must be used before the end of the month. Otherwise, everything tied to it would vanish. He hadn't said it to my brothers. He had said it to me, quietly, as if it was a secret only I was meant to hear. My brothers clinked their glasses again, their laughter rising like a tide. But I was already slipping away from their noise, my mind tangled with questions. What was tied to these tickets? Why had my father given them to me? And why was the lawyer so careful with his words? I pushed my chair back, the screech loud against the polished floor. They laughed again, assuming I was storming off in shame. "Run along, Harold," one shouted. "Maybe you'll catch your little train." Their voices followed me out of the office, cruel and relentless. But outside, in the quiet corridor, I finally exhaled. The air felt different, heavier. My father had hidden something in plain sight, and while my brothers were drunk on their wealth, I was left with the one thing they couldn't buy, a secret they didn't understand. I ran my fingers over the envelope as I walked, the edges cutting lightly into my skin. Each touch reminded me of my father's hand, the way he used to grip mine when words were too heavy. I couldn't let go. Not now. Not until I found out what he meant. The laughter from the office echoed faintly behind me, fading with every step. But the lawyer's voice was louder now, repeating in my head, "You lose everything tied to it." My pulse quickened. What could be tied to 2 old train tickets? I stopped at the door, my hand on the brass handle, and looked back. The office was silent now, the laughter muffled by distance. But I knew this wasn't over. Something had just begun, and I was the only one who could see it. Everything tied to it? What did that even mean? I stared at the envelope on my nightstand for days, the train tickets inside whispering at me every time I walked past. Each morning I told myself I'd forget them, that they were nothing, just a cruel, parting gift. But by night, I couldn't escape the weight of my father's question, or the lawyer's strange warning. The end of the month loomed closer with every tick of the clock. My brothers called me during those days, not to check on me, but to remind me of my humiliation. "Use those tickets yet?" One of them laughed over the phone. "Better hurry before the conductor realizes you don't belong in first class." Their voices dripped with arrogance, and I hung up before they could hear the anger trembling through my silence. Finally, one restless evening, I pulled the tickets from the envelope and studied them under the lamp. The paper smelled faintly of dust and iron, like something pulled from an attic box. The town printed on the destination line was one I'd never heard of. I traced the letters with my finger, my pulse quickening. Something inside me knew this wasn't a mistake. The next morning, I packed a small bag, just clothes, a notebook, and the envelope. My brothers wouldn't care if I vanished. They were too busy burning through their millions. As I locked the door behind me, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear of the unknown. Relief to finally leave behind the echo of their laughter. The train station was alive with sound. Announcements blaring through old speakers, the hiss of engines, footsteps rushing across the tile. I stood among the crowd clutching my ticket, my stomach twisting. The ticket man glanced at it, then at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing as he punched it. The train groaned as it pulled in, its metal wheels screeching like some tired beast. I climbed aboard, the steps rattling under my weight. Inside, the air smelled of leather seats and stale coffee. I found my place by the window, my heart thudding in my chest as the doors shut with a final echoing clang. The rhythm of the train soon swallowed me. The steady clack of wheels on rails, the gentle sway of the car. It felt almost like being carried somewhere against my will. I stared out the window as the city blurred past, giving way to wide stretches of countryside I hadn't seen in years. Across the aisle, an elderly man leaned forward, squinting at the ticket in my hand. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Headed to the town?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. When I nodded, his face changed. He looked at me like I wasn't a stranger at all. "Your father was well known where you're headed." My breath caught. I hadn't told him my name, hadn't said anything about my family. "You knew him?" I asked, my voice trembling. The old man smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Didn't know him, but everyone there did. You'll see." Then he leaned back, as if he had already said too much. The words rattled inside me as hard as the train itself. How could people hundreds of miles away know my father? He had never spoken of another town, another life. He lived and died in the same house where we all grew up. At least, that's what I thought. The train carried me deeper into the unknown. Outside the window, fields stretched endlessly, the horizon painted with gold and red as the sun sank low. The beauty should have calmed me, but all I felt was unease. My father had hidden something, and I was speeding toward it without any idea of what waited. I clutched the envelope tighter, my thumb rubbing the crease of the paper. My brothers would be laughing if they could see me now, chasing ghosts on a train. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a fool's errand. Something about the lawyer's eyes, the old man's words, the destination printed in faded ink. It all meant something. The night grew darker as the train thundered on. The passengers around me drifted to sleep, their heads nodding against the glass. I stayed awake, too restless, too wound up. Every sound, the rattle of metal, the low hum of wheels, felt like a countdown. A countdown to what? I didn't know. I pulled my notebook from my bag and wrote the town's name across the page, staring at it until the letters blurred. It looked ordinary, meaningless, but my father had chosen it, had tied it to my inheritance, to the very last words of his will. That meant it held weight. It had to. I thought of him in his final days, whispering questions that made no sense to me. What matters more? What you're given, or what you continue? Maybe this was his way of forcing me to answer. Maybe the journey was part of the lesson. I closed my eyes, resting my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The train roared through the night, carrying me further from the life I knew, further from the shadow of my brothers, and closer to something I couldn't name. Fear and anticipation tangled inside me, impossible to separate. Hours passed, like minutes. At one stop, a conductor walked by, his lantern swaying in the dim light. He paused when he saw my ticket on the seat. His lips parted slightly, as if he recognized it. But without a word, he kept walking. My skin prickled as I realized everyone seemed to know something I didn't. The whispers grew in my head, louder than the train itself. What had my father done? What had he built or hidden away? And why me? Why not my brothers with their greed and arrogance? Why was I the one chosen to take this journey? I wanted to believe it was because of the years I gave him, the sacrifices, the silence I carried while they mocked me. I wanted to believe this was his way of saying he saw me all along. But doubt clawed at me. What if it was another cruel test? Another way to measure how much I could endure? The train slowed, the screech of brakes slicing through the night. My chest tightened as the lights of a small station flickered into view. The name painted on the sign matched the one on my ticket. My hands shook as I gathered my bag. This was it. I stepped off the train, the wooden platform creaking under my shoes. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. A silence hung over the station, broken only by the whistle of the departing train as it vanished into the dark. I was alone, except for the envelope pressed against my chest. Then, from the corner of the platform, I heard a voice. Low, steady, almost expectant. "We've been waiting for you." My blood ran cold. How could strangers hundreds of miles away know my father? The voice startled me so deeply I nearly dropped the envelope. I turned toward the shadows, and an older woman stepped into the dim light. Her eyes scanned me, not with suspicion, but recognition. "You look just like him," she said softly. I froze, unable to answer. My father had never mentioned this place, and yet these people acted as if they'd been waiting. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't need to. Instead, he gestured toward the road leading away from the station. "Come," she said. "There's someone you should meet." My bag felt heavier on my shoulder, but I followed her anyway. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes, the only sound between us. The town revealed itself slowly as we walked. Narrow streets lit by old lamps, wooden storefronts with peeling paint, a diner with neon lights buzzing faintly against the night. It felt untouched by time, as if it had been preserved just for me. And everywhere we passed, people glanced up, their eyes lingering on me longer than strangers usually do. They whispered. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt them ripple behind me. A boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing. An old man outside the bar tipped his hat, his gaze steady. It was as if they knew me, though I'd never been here. The air felt thick with secrets I wasn't ready for. The woman stopped in front of the diner. Its windows glowed warm, and laughter spilled faintly from inside. "Go in," she told me. "They'll tell you what you need to know." Her voice was kind but firm, the kind that didn't invite argument. I nodded, clutching the envelope as if it could shield me. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried food and strong coffee. The chatter quieted as soon as I stepped through the door. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. And then, slowly, smiles spread across faces, like they had just seen a long-lost relative. My heart pounded. On the far wall, above the booths, hung a row of framed portraits. Old black-and-white photos of the town's founders. My breath caught when my eyes found it. My father's face, staring back at me from decades earlier. Younger, stronger, but unmistakably him. My knees went weak. A waitress stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're his boy, aren't you?" she asked, her voice trembling with awe. "He told us one day you'd come." I couldn't speak. My father had lived a life here, a life I never knew, and somehow he had prepared these people for me. I slid into a booth, my hands shaking as I laid the envelope on the table. The waitress brought coffee without asking, her eyes never leaving me. Around the diner, whispers spread again, words like "finally" and "just like him" floating through the air. It felt unreal, like I'd stepped into a story already written. I stared at the portrait again. My father stood tall, a hand resting on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize. A small plaque beneath read, "Founders of the Renewal." The words meant nothing to me, but they clearly meant everything to this town. My chest tightened. Who had my father been? The waitress leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He built this place, you know. Not alone, but he was the heart of it. The land, the businesses, the families. He gave us a future when no one else would." Her eyes glistened. "We owe him everything." My throat ached. The father I knew was tired, sick, a man worn down by years of illness. But here, he was remembered as a savior, a builder, a leader. 2 lives side by side, and I had only known one. The realization left me dizzy. I thought about my brothers back home, drowning in their arrogance, convinced they had inherited the world. They had no idea. None of them knew this side of him existed. And here I was, sitting in the middle of it, holding the one thing that had led me here. The envelope suddenly felt heavier than ever. I pulled out the tickets, sliding one across the table. The waitress's eyes widened. "He gave you these?" she whispered. When I nodded, her hand trembled as she touched the paper. "Then it's true. You're meant to continue what he started." I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. What was I supposed to continue? I wasn't a builder. I wasn't a leader. I was the forgotten son, the caretaker left behind. My hands were trained to hold pills and soup bowls, not land deeds or businesses. And yet, everyone here looked at me as if I carried my father's fire. The whispers around me grew louder. People began standing, approaching the table cautiously, like I was sacred. One after another, they introduced themselves. Farmers, shop owners, families who said my father had changed their lives. Their eyes shone with gratitude. Each story added weight I wasn't sure I could carry. I wanted to tell them they had the wrong son, that I wasn't him, that I had no idea what he'd done here. But their faces, so hopeful, so certain, kept me silent. I couldn't shatter the image they held. Not yet. The second ticket slipped from the envelope as I fumbled with it. It landed on the table, face up. A young man nearby gasped. "There are 2, he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. The crowd hushed instantly, all eyes on the slip of paper glowing under the diner's light. The waitress stared at it, her lips parting. "Then he meant for you to bring someone with you," she said softly. Her words hung heavy in the air. But why only you first? The question echoed inside me, sinking deeper than I wanted it to. I picked up the second ticket, holding it between my fingers. The paper felt warm, almost alive. My father hadn't sent me here alone by accident. There was another step, another piece to this puzzle. But who was I supposed to bring? The whispers pressed closer, a tide of voices urging, expecting. My chest tightened under their weight. My father had hidden a legacy here, a story none of my brothers had ever earned. And now, it was pressing down on me, demanding I carry it forward. I glanced again at the portrait. His eyes, though frozen in time, seemed to burn into me. It was as if he was asking the question once more. What matters more? What you're given, or what you continue? The answer felt closer now, but still out of reach. I folded the tickets carefully, slipping them back into the envelope. The room fell into silence, waiting for me to speak. But I had no words, only questions clawing at me. One thought pulsed in my mind, louder than the whispers, louder than the blood pounding in my ears. I was about to learn why my father sent me here first. The next morning, I woke in a small guest room above the diner. The wooden floor creaked under my steps as I moved toward the window. Outside, the town stretched beneath the rising sun, alive with the sounds of carts, doors opening, voices greeting each other warmly. It was simple, almost ordinary, yet it felt like every corner of it carried my father's shadow. When I stepped downstairs, the same faces from the night before greeted me. Smiles, nods, murmurs of recognition. They treated me like I belonged, even though I didn't. My chest tightened. I had never been anyone to my brothers. But here, strangers saw me as a continuation of someone they revered. A man approached me near the counter. He introduced himself as Thomas, the town's banker. His hands were rough, his suit worn but clean. He clasped my shoulder as though we were kin. "Your father was the man who saved us," he said simply. His eyes burned with conviction. "And now, you're here." Before I could respond, a woman in her 40s stepped forward. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Brother." My body stiffened. She threw her arms around me before I could pull back, holding me tightly. "You're finally here," she whispered, her tears wetting my shoulder. I froze, my mind racing. "Brother," I repeated, pulling away to see her face. She nodded, her expression earnest, almost pleading. He was my father, too. The room around us seemed to lean in closer, the whispers growing louder. My hands shook as I tried to process her words. She led me to a corner booth, her grip strong, almost desperate. "Our father built this town," she said, her voice steady now. "He gave us land, work, a future. He promised one day you would come. He promised you would know the truth." Her words sank into me like stones into water, impossible to pull back. I stared at her, disbelief battling with recognition. Her eyes, so much like his. The same crease when she frowned, the same quiet strength. My chest ached as the possibility grew too real to ignore. My father had another family, and he had hidden them from us. The townspeople confirmed it in their silence. They didn't look shocked at her claim. They nodded, as though it was old news. My brothers and I had been blind while this entire town carried a truth we never imagined. The woman, whose name was Margaret, wiped her tears and straightened. "He left us more than just stories. He left us papers, deeds, accounts, all in your name. He wanted you to continue what he built, not your brothers. You." The words made the diner spin. I tried to speak, but my voice broke. "Why? Why me? My whole life I had been the forgotten son, the one mocked, the one burdened with care. Why would he choose me for this?" Margaret's answer was quiet, but it cut through me. "Because you gave him your life when no one else would. He knew you wouldn't squander what mattered most." The weight of it pressed down until I could barely breathe. I wanted to deny it, to run back to the train and pretend none of this was real. But part of me, some hidden part, knew it was true, knew this was why he left me tickets, not millions. Margaret slid a folder across the table. Its edges were frayed, but inside were documents that glowed with importance. Land deeds, business titles, trust agreements, all bearing my father's name, all waiting for my signature. My fingers trembled as I touched the papers, the ink cool and sharp against my skin. The diner hushed again. The town seemed to hold its breath as I flipped through the pages. Every line told me the same story. My father hadn't left me scraps. He had left me the heart of something alive, something thriving, a legacy beyond numbers. Tears burned my eyes. My brothers had their millions, but money could rot, disappear, turn to dust. What my father left me here was living. People, land, businesses, roots that dug deep. This was worth more than every dollar they clutched. The whispers grew into murmurs of hope. The townspeople looked at me not as a stranger, but as someone returning to claim what was his. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years. Dignity. But it scared me too, because I wasn't sure I could live up to it. I looked at Margaret, her hand resting on mine. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. Her eyes softened. "Because he wanted you to see for yourself. to choose, not because of obligation, but because you believed it mattered. Her words stung with truth. I thought about the years I had lost caring for him, the humiliation from my brothers, the emptiness I felt when I received the envelope, and now, here I was, holding proof that he had trusted me with more than I ever imagined. My breath shook as I closed the folder. My hands pressed it tightly, as if letting go might undo everything. Margaret's gaze stayed steady, her eyes shining. "This is yours, Harold. He wanted you to continue it." The townspeople leaned closer, their voices quiet but insistent. Stories poured out, of jobs my father had created, of land he had cultivated, of debts he had paid when no one else would. Every tale painted him larger than life, and everyone ended with the same look: expectation. I couldn't shake the thought of my brothers back home. They would laugh if they saw me now. Laugh at the diner, the old papers, the whispers of simple folk. But deep inside, I knew they were wrong. I was holding something they could never understand. Something real. Margaret placed her hand on the folder. "There's more," she said. The room went silent again. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, older than the others, edges worn with time. "He left this with me. For you." My fingers shook as I took it. The paper was brittle, the handwriting unmistakable. My father's, steady and deliberate. I held my breath as I broke the seal. Inside were pages folded carefully, waiting for me to read. But before I could, Margaret's voice stopped me. "Be ready," she whispered. "What's inside will change everything." I froze, the paper warm in my hands, my father's words waiting to be uncovered. My heart hammered against my chest. And then they showed me the papers my father left in their care. The envelope shook in my hands as I unfolded the first page. My father's handwriting stretched across the paper, neat and commanding, every stroke deliberate. His words felt alive, as though he was speaking directly to me through time. I swallowed hard, the diner around me fading, until all I saw were the letters before me. "My sons," the letter began. My chest tightened at the word, because already I knew this wasn't written for my brothers too. The next lines proved it. "To the one who stayed, to the one who gave without being asked, to the one who bore the burden, I trust you." My hands trembled as the letters blurred through my tears. The pages went on, detailing land holdings, businesses, and trusts that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. He had built not just a town, but a foundation of wealth and stability hidden from the world, and every line ended with the same point. All of it was tied to me, to my name, to my choice. Margaret watched quietly, her hands folded in her lap. The townspeople leaned in, their silence heavy with anticipation. I turned another page, my father's words cutting deeper. "Your brothers receive what they believe they want. Money. But money alone is hunger. It eats itself. I give them millions, and with it, the debts I concealed from them. They will feast, and they will starve." I froze. Debts? My breath caught as I reread the lines. My father had deliberately left them not only cash, but liabilities hidden beneath it. Investments bound by contracts, risks disguised as gifts. They thought they had won. In truth, he had handed them ruin dressed in silk. The paper crackled under my fingers as I read on. "You, Harold, I give the work of my hands and the trust of those who believed in me. Because you will not waste what was planted. You will water it. You will continue it." His words echoed the question he once whispered in the dark. What matters more? My throat burned. All the humiliation, all the shame, they twisted now into something else. My brothers had mocked me for being the servant son, but in truth, I was the heir to the part of my father that mattered most. Not the money, but the roots, the living inheritance. I set the papers down, my pulse thundering. The room was still, every eye on me. I looked at Margaret, searching her face for confirmation. She nodded once, slowly. "It's true. He trusted you because you gave when it cost you everything. He saw it, Harold, even if he never said it aloud." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. All those nights I thought I was invisible. All those years of silence. It hadn't been unnoticed. He had seen me. He had chosen me. My chest cracked open under the weight of it. I lifted the papers again, flipping to the last page. There was one final note, shorter than the rest. The tickets were not a joke. They are a test. One brings you here. The other will decide who stands with you. Choose wisely. My breath hitched as I read the final words. Do not squander what you continue. The second ticket burned in my pocket like fire. Who was I meant to bring? My brothers? Someone here? Someone else entirely? The weight of the decision pressed against me, heavier than any I had carried before. Around me, voices began to rise. The townspeople murmured about legacy, about trust, about the future he had left. Their eyes shone with hope, but also with expectation. They believed I would step into his shoes, that I would carry the torch. I wasn't sure I was strong enough. Margaret reached for my hand. You don't have to decide tonight, she said softly. But know this, the businesses, the land, the trust funds, they are already tied to your name. It is all yours. The only question is what you will do with it. Her words both comforted and crushed me. I closed my eyes, the image of my brothers flashing behind my eyelids. Their laughter, their arrogance, their greedy toasts. They thought they had triumphed, but they were already standing on quicksand. And soon, they would sink. A part of me wanted to warn them. Another part wanted to watch them drown. The papers trembled in my hands as I folded them back into the envelope. My father had left me everything worth keeping, and left them everything that would break them. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice, measured in silence. And now, it was mine to carry. I leaned back, exhaling shakily. Margaret's eyes stayed locked on me. You see now, don't you? She asked. Why it had to be you? I nodded slowly, though doubt still gnawed at me. I had spent my life being small. Could I really step into something this big? The room waited for me to speak, but my words refused to come. All I could do was hold the envelope against my chest. My father's handwriting pressed close to my heart. I thought of his frail voice in the night, asking his question again and again. And finally, I understood. It wasn't about what I had been given. It was about what I chose to continue. And now, the choice was mine. The thought hit me like a thunderclap. The tickets weren't a cruel joke. They were a door, a test of faith, of trust, of patience. My father had known exactly what he was doing. I rose from the booth, the envelope tight in my grip. The townspeople stepped back, their faces glowing with quiet reverence. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the forgotten son. I stepped toward the door, the cool night air spilling in. My father's words rang in my ears, heavy and certain. That's when I realized the train tickets weren't a joke. They were a test. I returned home days later with the envelope tucked close to my chest. The town's whispers followed me, echoing in my mind. While my father's words burned like fire under my skin, I carried a truth my brothers couldn't imagine. But as soon as I walked into the city, the air changed. Their arrogance was waiting for me. My phone buzzed before I even stepped into my apartment. It was a message from Harold Jr. Lost much on your little trip, pauper? The cruelty was familiar, but it no longer stung the same. I smiled bitterly. If only he knew. If only he understood what their millions really carried. The next day, I met them face to face. They were gathered in Harold Jr.'s penthouse, a shrine to wealth. Marble floors, glass walls, art that screamed money instead of beauty. They looked smug, glasses in hand, their laughter filling the air like it always did. But beneath it, I noticed something different. A crack. Back from chasing ghosts? My youngest brother sneered. His suit was crisp, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. Hope your cardboard fortune didn't blow away in the wind. His words were sharp, but his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his glass. I didn't miss it. They were already bleeding. I could smell it. The markets hadn't been kind, their investments worse. I saw it in the papers scattered on the table, in the quick way they covered numbers when I glanced too long. They were sinking, and they didn't want me to see. I said nothing. I simply set my bag down, the envelope still hidden inside. Their laughter echoed, but my silence unnerved them. Harold Jr. slammed his glass onto the table. Say something, Harold. Tell us about your grand inheritance. Was it a train ride? and a diner breakfast. His voice cracked with desperation more than mockery. For the first time, I met his gaze without lowering mine. "How are your millions holding up?" I asked quietly. The room stilled. His smirk faltered, and the others glanced at each other nervously. Their silence was sweeter than any insult I could have thrown back. One brother barked a laugh, too loud, too forced. "We're fine, better than fine. You think you can shame us with your pity? We're untouchable." "Oh." But even as he spoke, his fingers fidgeted with the cuff of his shirt, pulling at the thread. Lies wrapped in bravado. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. "He left me nothing worth stealing," I said, my voice even. "But he left you everything you can't keep." Their faces twitched, just for a moment. They didn't understand fully. Not yet. But the fear in their eyes told me they suspected. The days that followed revealed everything. News spread of bad investments, debts called in, partnerships collapsing. The millions they celebrated were bleeding out faster than they could stop, and with every headline, their arrogance cracked further. Meanwhile, I returned to the town. The businesses flourished under my name. The people welcomed me. The legacy grew stronger. I carried papers with my signature now, deeds tied to land, contracts to companies. My brothers clung to slipping accounts while I held roots. It wasn't long before the first call came. My youngest brother, his voice sharp with panic. "We need to talk," he said. "You wouldn't understand, but things aren't stable." I listened silently, the memory of his laughter at the will burning in my ears. I didn't answer. The second came days later, from the middle brother. His arrogance had soured into anger. "You think you're better than us with your scraps? When this is over, you'll be begging for what we had." His voice shook, the threat hollow. I hung up before he finished. Finally, Harold Jr. called. His tone was quieter than I'd ever heard. "You went west, didn't you?" he asked. "Tell me, Harold, what did you find there?" His voice was tired, cracked at the edges. For once, he wasn't mocking. He was afraid. I wanted to tell him the truth, to throw his arrogance back in his face. But my father's words held me back. This wasn't about revenge. It was about continuation. I stayed silent, and silence was sharper than any insult. Weeks passed, and their world crumbled faster. I saw them in the papers, desperate deals, faces pale with stress. They were losing it all, while pretending to still be kings. They didn't know that their throne had always been built on sand. And then, it happened. They showed up at my door. All three of them, dressed in suits that no longer fit like armor, but like costumes. Their eyes were hollow, their confidence gone. They looked at me not as brothers mocking a fool, but as beggars seeking mercy. "Harold," Harold Jr. said, his voice low, almost broken. We need your help." His hands shook as he held out a folder, papers spilling from inside. Numbers, debts, desperation. His empire had collapsed into ash. The sight should have satisfied me. After years of their cruelty, I should have felt triumph. But instead, I felt only the weight of my father's question pressing against me again. What matters more? What you're given, or what you continue? They stood in my doorway, the roles reversed. The arrogant kings turned into desperate men. The servant son turned into the one holding the torch. My heart pounded, the second ticket heavy in my pocket. I could save them, or I could let them drown. My father had trusted me to continue his work, but he had never told me what to do with them. This choice was mine alone. I looked into their hollow eyes, their hands trembling, their pride broken. And in that silence, I understood something terrifying. They wouldn't stop until they had dragged me into their ruin too. And soon enough, they came begging. They stood there on my doorstep, three men who once mocked me now stripped of their crowns. Their suits were wrinkled, their shoes scuffed, their voices no longer filled with the arrogance that had once suffocated me. For a long time, none of us spoke. Only the weight of our father's shadow hung between us. Harold Jr. finally broke the silence. "We've lost almost everything," he admitted, his tone clipped but hollow. "The markets collapsed on us. The debts are heavier than we thought. You don't know what it's like, Harold." His eyes darted toward the envelope I held. "But you have something, don't you?" The youngest brother stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Help us." Just this once." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "We'll pay you back. We'll make it right." For the first time, he didn't sound like a man mocking me. He sounded like a child begging for scraps. I stared at them, my mind racing with every insult, every sneer, every glass raised over my humiliation. Their laughter echoed in my ears, but so did my father's voice. "What matters more? What you're given, or what you continue?" The words dug deep, demanding an answer. My middle brother's anger flared, his pride too stubborn to stay quiet. "You think you're better than us now? You think holding some old papers makes you a king?" His voice shook as he spoke. "You're still the servant son. Without us, you're nothing." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He wasn't threatening me. He was pleading. I placed the envelope on the table between us, my hands steady despite the storm inside. "Do you know what this is?" I asked quietly. Their eyes locked onto it, hungry, fearful, desperate. None of them answered. The silence was louder than any word they could have spoken. I leaned forward. "Father didn't just give you money. He gave you debts hidden inside that fortune. He gave you exactly what you wanted, knowing it would destroy you." Their faces went pale. The truth cracked their pride like glass. The youngest shook his head violently. "No, no, he wouldn't. He wouldn't do that to us." But the panic in his eyes told me he already knew it was true. He had seen the numbers. He had felt the noose tightening. He just hadn't wanted to admit it. Harold Jr. swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "And what about you? What did he give you?" His eyes burned with both envy and despair. He wanted me to say, "Nothing." He wanted me to be as empty as they were, but I wasn't. I opened the envelope and pulled out one page, laying it flat on the table. Land deeds, businesses, contracts tied to the town they had never heard of. Their jaws tightened as they realized. Father had left me the foundation, while they had inherited quicksand. The silence stretched until it snapped. Harold Jr. slammed his hand on the table, his face red. "It isn't fair," he shouted. "We're the ones who built empires. We deserved the inheritance." His rage filled the room, but all I felt was calm. For once, I wasn't the one on my knees. I stood slowly, looking each of them in the eye. "You spent your lives chasing what you were given," I said, my voice steady, "and you lost it. I spent mine continuing what was left behind, and now I understand why he trusted me." Their faces twisted with disbelief, but I saw the cracks spreading deeper. Their empire was gone. Their arrogance was gone. And for the first time, they knew they had misunderstood our father completely. The youngest stepped forward again, his voice trembling. "So what now? You'll let us starve while you play hero in some forgotten town? Is that what you call continuing his legacy?" His words cut, but they couldn't wound me anymore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the second train ticket. Their eyes widened as they saw it, their bodies leaning in unconsciously. The slip of paper glowed under the dim light, small but powerful. "He left me too," I said quietly. "One brought me there. The other is meant for someone else." They stared at it like starving men staring at bread. Their breaths grew shallow, their hands twitching. But I didn't move. I held the ticket between my fingers, letting them see it but not touch. The weight of the choice pressed heavier than ever. "Father asked me a question once," I said, my voice low. "What matters more? What you're given, or what you continue?" I looked at them, their faces pale, desperate, broken. "You never asked yourselves that. You only ever wanted what was handed to you." Harold Jr.'s lips parted, his voice barely a whisper. "And what about you?" The question trembled in the air, sharp as a blade. For the first time, he wasn't mocking me. He was afraid of the answer. I placed the ticket back into the envelope, my hands deliberate, final. "I know now," I whispered. "I finally understand what he meant." Their eyes widened, their voices collided, begging, demanding, pleading for the truth. But I stayed silent. The room shook with their desperation, their words crashing into me like waves. Yet inside, I felt steady for the first time in my life. The servant son, no longer. The forgotten son, no longer. I held the torch, and they couldn't take it from me. My father's voice echoed again in my head, clear as day. "What matters more? What you're given, or what you continue?" And this time, I didn't just hear it. I understood it. The air grew heavy as I stepped back, my brothers pressing forward, their eyes burning holes into the envelope in my hands. Their world was collapsing, and they thought I was their last rope. But I wasn't their rope. I was their mirror. And what they saw terrified them. In that moment, I finally understood the choice my father left me. The next morning, I woke with the envelope still on the table beside me. My brothers had left in the night, their voices hoarse from begging, their eyes hollow from the truth they could no longer deny. I stared at the sunlight spilling across the floorboards and realized that the weight I carried was no longer shame. It was responsibility. I thought of their faces, broken by greed and desperation. For years they mocked me, belittled me, called me the servant son. But in the end, they were the ones who became slaves, to their hunger, to their vanity, to their pride. My father had known. He had seen it long before I did. I returned to the town days later, the train humming beneath me, the second ticket tucked safely in the envelope. The moment I stepped off, the people greeted me with warmth, their hands reaching, their smiles steady. It wasn't about money here. It was about trust, about roots that dug deep and held strong. Margaret met me outside the diner, her eyes bright as she took my hand. "You came back," she whispered, relief in her voice. I nodded, feeling the truth settle in my chest. "This is where I belong," I said softly, and I knew, even as the words left my mouth, that they were real. We sat together, spreading the documents across the table once more. Deeds, trusts, company ledgers, all waiting for my signature. My father's words echoed in every line. "Do not squander what you continue." My hands shook slightly as I signed, not from fear, but from the gravity of stepping into something bigger than myself. The town cheered that evening, not for wealth, not for glory, but for a future they believed I could help carry. Their faith humbled me more than their gratitude. I had never been celebrated before, not in my family, not in my life. But here, I wasn't the forgotten son. I was the heir to something living. As the night fell, I pulled out the second ticket and held it under the diner's light. Its paper glowed faintly, fragile yet powerful. Margaret's eyes followed it, her voice trembling. "Do you know yet who it's for?" she asked. I looked at her and shook my head. "Not yet," I admitted, "but I will." Because that was the truth. The ticket wasn't about saving my brothers. It wasn't about rescuing greed from drowning. It was about choosing wisely who would stand beside me in continuing this legacy. That choice wasn't meant to be rushed. It was meant to be lived. The next week, news reached me that my brothers' fortunes had collapsed completely. Their accounts frozen, their houses repossessed, their names tarnished in the circles they once ruled. They had mocked me for holding scraps, yet now they had less than scraps. They had nothing. I expected to feel triumph. I expected satisfaction. But instead, I felt a quiet sadness. Not because they didn't deserve it. They did. But because they had never learned. They had been given everything and lost it all, never once stopping to ask the question that mattered most. I walked through the town square that evening, the lanterns glowing softly, children laughing as they ran past. The people greeted me with nods, with words of gratitude, with stories of how my father's work had changed their lives. Each story was another root tying me to the soil, binding me to the choice I had already made. I thought of my father in those final days, his whisper soft but piercing. What matters more, what you're given, or what you continue? At last, I knew my answer. It was never about the millions. It was about this, the lives, the roots, the trust that carried forward beyond the grave. The servant's son, mocked for his silence, had become the steward of something greater than wealth. My father had seen it, even when I could not. And now I carried that torch, not for glory, not for revenge, but because it mattered. I stood at the edge of the town, watching the horizon turn gold with the rising sun. The ticket weighed softly in my pocket, reminding me of the choice still ahead. But for the first time, the weight didn't scare me. It steadied me. It gave me direction. My brothers might come again, their hands outstretched, their voices desperate, but I knew now what I would say. I would not save greed. I would not continue their ruin. I would continue this. My father's legacy, my father's trust, my father's question, answered in the life I chose to live. The second ticket was not a burden. It was a promise. And one day, I would know exactly who to place it in the hands of. Someone who understood that wealth is not counted in millions, but in roots, in trust, in the lives you touch. I looked back at the diner, the portrait of my father hanging on the wall. His eyes, even frozen in black and white, seemed to hold mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like he was testing me. I felt like he was proud. I whispered into the quiet evening, as if he could hear me still. I understand now, Father, and I won't squander it. The wind carried the words, soft but certain, as though they belonged to the air of this place. The legacy wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone here. But I was the one entrusted to carry it, and I would, with dignity, with purpose, with the weight and the light of knowing what truly mattered. My brothers could chase what they were given until the end of their days. But me? I would continue what was built, what was worth saving, what was worth giving my life to. And in that choice, I found something greater than inheritance. I found freedom. Real wealth isn't counted in dollars. It's counted in roots, trust, and the lives you touch. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have chosen revenge or continuation? Comment below and tell me what you think of this ending.